Bonsoir.
Very good evening.
Les femmes ne sont pas en sécurité dans notre pays.
So women aren't safe in our country. This statement is not coming from a militant or an association, but a federal councillor, Elisabeth von Schneider. During this time, the Protection Association to Protect Victims requesting aid for the prevention or to protect people towards a global strategy. In Switzerland, femicide takes place every 2 weeks, and as we said during the introduction of this documentary, the statistics from to date are very alarming. Women aren't safe in our country. We will talk about violence. We'll talk about control and socio-political context, which doesn't reassure us, but really makes us wake up to dream about a society which can change through awareness raising. And we'll discuss this during this roundtable, involving everyone here. The ladies have accepted this invitation from this film festival, and it is an honor for me. We have Camille Froidevaux-Metterie, who's a philosopher and professor of political science. She's a philosopher specializing in feminist thought. Her research includes research of the feminine and such a large stomach. This is which includes experiences of pregnant women. And also, we have Giulia, who is a producer of France Inter and a journalist, and she also has a podcast called En Marche. And her book, she's an author of I'm 1 and 2, and What Feminism has done for me, which is being published recently. And then Béatrice Cortellini, who is a psychotherapist and a director of AVVEC, which is help for victims of domestic violence. She's also and also Bernadette Saint-Remy is the director of the film that you've just seen, who's going to join us a little bit later on. But let's applaud her for that film. Give her a round of applause. Bernadette Saint-Remy, please. Thank you so much. And you'll come and join us later for a Q&A session. So Camille, Béatrice Cortellini, and Giulia Foïs, very good evening once again. You were there in the front row watching this documentary. So what are your first thoughts? What are your first reactions to that film? Camille, please. A harmed humanity. It's certainly very emotive. What I was really struck by was such intensity to try and find the right words for what I've seen. So efficiency, but I don't really feel comfortable with that, but support, empathy, sharing. I thought it was magnificent. So what comes to mind is admiration and acknowledgement for all these women who are anonymous and who are at the forefront of this violence, this systemic violence. We owe them a lot. The world owes them a lot because they suffer throughout the day. They're ready to listen and to be heard. And these women have learned to raise questions. Their point of view is something else. They don't always know what to do. So we have concepts, but sometimes we find it difficult to raise questions and to let the words just come. This is particularly for women and for men. Perhaps as we'll see this later on, but to raise these types of questions, to understand that often we need to ask these difficult questions. Béatrice Cortellini. This film is absolutely fantastic. And also, this is the very tip of the iceberg, of course. Physical and sexual violence is 1 out of 5 women in Switzerland who endure this in their relationship. So this really shows us a little bit of the scope of this issue. 1 out of 5 women who suffer physical and sexual violence by their partner. This is domestic violence, and this film, of course, captures this and the possibility to offer a shelter accommodation in Geneva. Is this also a reality? Yes, absolutely.
Là, à nouveau, l'hébergement,
Accommodation and shelter is the very last recourse to work with these people from the very beginning, before we reach extreme situations. So emergency shelter is available, but really the idea is to really work from the very beginning and preventative. So do you work from the house as well? Yes. Talking about, of course, one has to support these people. It's certainly very emotional, very moving discussions with these people that we heard from in the film, because there are really small steps, baby steps that have to be taken. This is a lengthy process. So domestic violence increases every day, like hair, it grows every day. Between today and tomorrow, there is not much changes, but if we take a snapshot every 6 months, we would say, we would have to go and cut our hair, for example, go to the hairdressers after 6 months. But really have to look very closely and identify, and to slowly take these steps and to see what we see in the film and all the work that we see in the film. But it's not always in an emergency or crisis situation. But so working at home, what does that mean? So in the film, we remember this, the lady who takes the phone call when she says, please pick up, but not straight away. But this is also working on the control aspect. One has to be able to give them back some freedom. For example, when they might pick up the phone, how many times a day, and what kind of scenario. And this is really giving them back some power, whether this is via on the phone, talking with a friend, for example, as well. But also in the opening of the film, this offering this lady say, where would you like to sit? You're giving her the freedom of choice, which might seem ridiculous for us, but this is a huge task for this lady, to be able to give her the choice to choose where she wants to sit, to see where, over a lot of time, which will take a lot of energy and patience, which will truly emerge over time. So we're going to talk about the control and violence. Giulia Foïs, this is based primarily on fear. So it's a climate of terror and fear. So whether it's in the family or within the couple, but also collectively. When you leave home, as Sandrine mentioned, we understand this as women. When we walk on the streets, we have an eye on our backs what's going on behind. We have fear. When we're just walking along the street, it might be depending on your time of your life or time in the day. The most serious danger is when you're at home, but we have to learn how to live with this. When we when men begin to feel scared, I'd like to see when that would happen. Of course, men don't like to be mocked or made fun of, but women face the fear of being raped or killed. During the film, we talk about fear and victims of people who are kind of fall under the grip of their partners. So the question of imprisonment, or which women are faced with. This goes back to ancient times, ancient Greek times. The women have to be available for society in their body and sexual and maternal responsibilities. This conditioning of assigning their body is shared amongst all women. Some women live through the nightmare of this imprisonment because they become just pure objects who are mistreated, who are thrown aside, and they completely disappear as subjects. They just become objects. Over the last decade, this objectification and survival, which is seen throughout history, the big thinkers have been able to deconstruct this assignment of women and their bodies, and to be able to reinterpret this patriarchal concept to make it compatible with democracy. And this notion has continued for the last 10 or so years. We had a scandal of the availability of the women, the Me Too movement, and what feminists, this new generation of feminists who decided to rise up and to get back into the roots of the problem and to address these issues regarding to what women can or cannot do. And with this, for the last 10 or so years, this is what we're doing today, this evening as well. We reach a moment when we're able to reflect and discuss what we have been successful in doing. But unfortunately, what we are living through is something that's just going to imperil this dynamic. So, for example, the issue of blame as well, which the documentary looks at. And the victims, all that you see.
There was even a character saying that, I don't know if I deserve being here, having been hit in a fortnight. What can you say about that? Well, all emotions are part of the issue, fear, shame, guilt. And as a reminder, when you have been a victim of violence, being someone's victim or victim of something, to become an active subject again, it's hard, but you have to go through guilt, because you have to relearn the fact that by acting you can protect yourself. Of course, you can't dwell in your guilt for too long because it won't take you anywhere, but your responsibility is to protect yourself and your children. So there's that phase of guilt, which is something you have to go through to become a subject again, and that's what we focus on in psychotherapy. Can you be the same person before and after trauma? Before and after trauma. Well, there was someone in a film who was saying that I'm not the same person anymore. Well, that's the struggle of a lifetime, and I hesitate to say I and to speak for myself because I'm tired of hearing my own story. Some of you know that I've been raped when I was 20, and my rapist was then acquitted. So what you're saying is true. when you consider that you're responsible for what happened to you, that's a way for you to still keep control over your own life, because it's terrifying having been someone's object, because if there's something that's inalienable, it's the fact that you are a thinking subject, but then suddenly someone tells you you're worthless, you have no autonomy at all. So it's something that you have to accept. It's terrifying, but it's a necessary step for what happens later. And to answer your question, for me, well, it took me a while to reflect upon what it turned me into. And one day I realized that I had made something of the traumatic event. And I think traumatic events don't transform you, they amplify what you were before. So I had received a very liberated education. I'm even more liberated now. If there's something I don't like, I will say it. So now I'm me, but bigger, amplified. It took me years to glue the pieces back together, but now I'm me with this trauma. Of course, I could very well have done without it, but what my family and friends did for me was never questioning my responsibility in this this affair, and they've always been there to support me. Of course, now, I often say that I'm a human being with crutches, but at the same time, I got so used to them that I walk faster than most people, and I can even go farther. So we just have to live with it. So how can you live with it in that context, in the current sociopolitical context, with the current backlash that we're witnessing? Well, if we're talking about backlash, that goes to show that the feminist movement has been formidable, and Me Too did me a world of good, and I don't think I'm the only one. Just goes to show that there are many of us. So yes, we have adversaries, and they are strong, and they are giving low blows, but there's always more of us, and we are ever more determined. That's absolutely true. And on the 8th of March last week, I don't know if there was demonstration in Geneva. Of course there was one. Well, we go to the streets, and we can see and feel how many of us there are and how strong the bonds that we're creating are. However, when we look at what happened throughout the history of feminism, is that there's about a decade of mobilization and wins, and then it's followed by I can't call it a backlash, but we're being silenced again. So it's a little bit like society is telling women that, okay, you wanted this, you got it, now that's it, enough. It happened in the 1930s with the civil and political rights, and then the 80s as well, with the second wave feminism, and we're back at it again for a third time. There are very clear signals that show us what is happening in the US and in Europe as well. For me, it's so strong that I'm working on a paper, a collective text, a very political text. That's some sort of declaration of resistance. So it's sad that that phase is over, because it was great. These young feminists fighting for their rights and the convergence of struggles. Now we are in defensive mode. We can still be combative, of course, but there's something new that's come up, and what I hope we'll be able to achieve is not to fall into the vertiginous trap of Well, I don't want to blame our predecessors because now we can look at history and see that once again we might fall into the trap of being silenced. We are being told to stay in our place. I don't know what's the situation like in Switzerland, but I do have the impression that this is all cyclical. You know, in France there are court cases that everywhere in the news. We talk about them and then nothing changes, like the Mazan trial. Giulia, Foïs, what did the Mazan trial change in France? Absolutely nothing. Nothing. It's exactly what Camille is talking about. It's cyclical. The only thing is that before Mazan, the Mazan trial, we thought that we had no issue with the patriarchy, and then there was the Mazan trial, and now, well, the idea is that thanks to the Mazan trial, everything is fine again. So, for those who were not aware of the situation, well, that was quite striking, but even for us feminists, it's how deep-rooted is rape culture in our society, and it's how. What I'm hoping from this is for things to become political, and in France at least, politicians are very disappointing. And it's even worse than that. When we talk about intimate partner violence, and in the current government has not increased the budget for intimate partner violence, and because the budget, there's inflation, the budget haven't increased, that means that the budget has decreased per woman by 25%. So on the one hand, they are very young feminists, 20 years old, they go down to the street and they are very inventive, courageous. But when you look at the institutions, the justice system, for example, nothing's happening. Beatrice Cortellini, could you tell us about the situation in Switzerland and on institutions? Well, it's not much better than in France. It could even be a little bit worse. It's true that we're passing laws, but Switzerland is much slower than the rest of European countries. We're not very fast with that. In 2004, though, there was a law that was passed on intimate partner violence. So it's a law that was 20 years ago, and that law doesn't require you to report the violence for it to be taken to court. For example, if you're aware of violences, your neighbors, for example, or in your family, then you have the obligation to report those violences. I think it's symbolical, but it's still interesting. So what do the French feminists think about it? Well, the fact that the mindsets are changing, the vocabulary is changing. I was talking about this to the young feminists. They do have tools now that we didn't have back then. When it happened to me when I was 20, I was convinced that I was the only one that happened to. So if I'm the only one it happened to, then maybe part of it is my fault. Younger woman, if it happens to her, of course, it's going to make her feel so lonely. It's going to be terrible. But now, thanks to the Me Too movement, she knows that we are legion and we are all standing and ready to hold her hand. And I think it changes things a little bit. Giulia, Foïs, can we talk about the limits of legal action? There is a video shown at the French National Assembly where you say, he was acquitted and I was crushed a second time. Well, Mazan, the Mazan trial had an impact on me that it must have had on a number of women who've gone through trial for rape as well. And there's not that many of us who can go as far as legal proceeding. For me, I felt like I was hit by a ton of bricks. I didn't feel great during the trial at all, especially as the trial was happening very close to where I used to live 20 years ago. Some of the lawyers of the Mazan rapists were the lawyers of the man who raped me. They're the exact same people, the exact same sisters with the exact same arguments 20 years later. Or 25, I don't know, I'm not great at math. But that plunged me back into that part of my personal history. And feminism, it's sorority. I discussed the issue with Emilie, and for a very long time I felt that what I felt at court was the continuity of the first trauma. But no, it's a second trauma. It's institutional violence. The lawyers of Gisèle Pellicot talked about courthouse mistreatment, and France is being sued in front of the European Court of Human Rights for secondary victimization by 8 women. For 8 women who went to court for sexual violences. And when I tell you that the justice system cannot reinvent itself, it's because it considers that it's above order. And whenever we criticize the justice system as feminists, we're being told that, come on, it's fine, it's not like Afghanistan. But we know that in Anglo-Saxon countries, solicitors do not have the right to question the past of the victims. You can't ask a victim what they've been doing before. You could very much have been a sex worker. That has nothing to do with the rape itself. And in France, the justice system cannot recognize the fact that there is institutional violence that's justified by absolutely nothing, no legal principle, nothing. The judge is in charge of policing the audience and making sure that the victims are not mistreated. And also, when lawyers pass the bar, they swear an oath to do their job with probity. And I don't quite think we're there yet. There's a new generation of women lawyers and women magistrates who are starting to look into this, because I was invited in a convention of magistrates, and there were just 2 men, about 2 men. So it's interesting how they always feel attacked, but they're never very much concerned by the issue. It's interesting, and you're right by saying that it's shed light on quite a number of things. When you say that it's changed nothing, well, will the whole thing disappear? Yeah, that's what I mean. The Mazan trial started a collective and intimate discussion, because we know that, in households, discussions have happened, and maybe for the first time since the Me Too movement, men didn't have the choice but to face those discussions. And I wrote a column in Le Monde in September on that, precisely on that topic, and because I felt that as feminists, we had to rise to the occasion and hold men accountable. I think all men should feel shame. They should feel shame. That's a word that Gisèle Pélicaud herself used. She said that no, shame needed to change sides. But shame is a very feminine emotion. It's an emotion that becomes ingrained from puberty on, because we teach our daughters to feel inadequate, and shame is an emotion that accompanies you as a woman all your life. And men should at least be ashamed of being inactive bystanders. And that column in Le Monde got hundreds of comments by men saying not all men. So there were monsters at Mazan and the other men. And I find that very interesting. And the second part of the column that got me criticism from of another type is the fact that we feminists have a responsibility here to help men face their responsibilities, listen, understand, educate themselves, understand what we're talking about, we've been talking about for so long. But as feminists, for us, it means that we need to be, I don't know, maybe welcoming, but find proposals to help them educate themselves. The first thing could be accepting some of their initiative without always breathing down their neck. For example, in October, there was an initiative from men trying to collect signatures. It was what it was. It wasn't ideal, maybe not perfect. Out of all the signatory, there were one or two who weren't kosher, but some feminists just destroyed this initiative. And I find that quite tangible, because if some men have the courage to speak up, then it's a good thing. I remember a discussion I had with my husband on these topics. He actually became quite tense because he couldn't articulate his thoughts. He was fine saying, yeah, not all men, but with Pélicaud, there was something different. And at some point, I got really annoyed and asked him, why are you trying to find him excuses? And then he stopped and he told me, well, you know, I think I'm ashamed. And that's where my idea for the article came from. He told me I'm ashamed as a man. And then we did this small video with the journalist. If we can get men's voices heard, I don't know what's going on in Switzerland, but in France, there's no man, no famous journalist, no comedian. You know it as well as I do. On France Inter, there are journalists that defend men who've been accused. And when you listen to that, well, it's terrifying. When they get the opportunity to support one another, that's what they do. Yesterday evening in Paris, I was at a theatre play, the Me Too theatre play. The play is called Les Histrioniques, and there's a point where comedians play men, women comedians playing men, and they play men who've been accused. And then they're telling each other, I love you, you know, I love you. And at the beginning, I found that was quite weird. Why are they declaring their love for one another? And then I realized, but the thing is that men love themselves. They love each other so much that they are ready to do anything to help their buddy who's being accused of something. But that has to stop. And here I'm talking to the men in the room and beyond. You need to stop that support system.
So we have to give people their voices. But if you look at what's happening in playgrounds with bullying, there are some are there who are looking at what is happening. So we have that issue, but also they're taken along with what's happening. So I prefer to say that I live on a planet where the other half of humanity are no longer 3.5 years old. They've become a responsible adult and have the bravery to speak out, even if it's uncomfortable. It's a reality, for example, in France, or attempted rape or rape every 2.5 minutes. So let's face up to this reality, because until the problem is sufficiently addressed, we cannot resolve it. But when I say we all have to work on this, because this is a system that concerns each and every one of us. We don't have a choice, because the patriarchy doesn't always take this up, because the system isn't working, of course. But now, 7 years at least. So the argument saying, I didn't really know what was happening, doesn't really work anymore. Now, this is interesting, because at each feminist wave, because there are radical discussions, for example.
Ils sont nombreux quand même.
Since Mazan, things haven't really changed, because guys just continue to say, it's not me. But what they have to understand is that if there is a rape, this is the end of domination. It's the most violent ending to this patriarchal system. As a whole, women are made a minority because there's continued violence, such as sexual jokes at the coffee machine and rape as well. But I wouldn't really like to congratulate them I don't want to give them a standing ovation for anything, because they see this as normal. I'm not going to congratulate them, of course. But what would be interesting for the discussion? So ask them, what was their part in this system, perhaps? But perhaps the next sexist joke at the coffee machine, because we have to really change the paradigm. When I hear all these blokes and these but don't you love us anymore? But make yourselves lovable. That's what I'd like to say. Do something. You can't ask us to make you lovable.
Giulia Foïs.
Giulia Foïs, thank you very much for those comments. I think you have to make a move, I believe. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you once again.
Élisée, son livre qui vient de sortir.
And her book, which has just come out, Not All Men, that has just been published.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
Et moi, je vous propose,
I'd like to suggest Bernadette Serami, please to come in and take Giulia's chair on the stage. You're the director of the film. Thank you very much. Please come and join us on stage.
Est-ce que vous avez un micro?
Do you have a microphone as a speaker? Yes, I do.
Ça a dû être frustrant pour vous d'être là.
Oui. Non, pas du tout. Non.
Qu'est-ce que vous a inspiré ces discussions?
What has inspired you from this discussion? It really gives me a lot of enthusiasm, because I think we've really all understood. It's already not a bad thing, because there's been a lot of work undertaking. I think Giulia has truly understood. I didn't think anyone would see us when the lady said, would you like the red or the yellow armchair? Because that's something I really, really loved. And I'm so happy that this was picked up on in the film. But I'm certainly delighted to have been understood. We talked about the involvement of men. There isn't a single man, but I did have a male cameraman and sound man. But then when they're surrounded by feminism, they don't have anything to say. But they really did as they were told and followed my instructions. Please put yourself there, put the camera there. They certainly listened up. And it was certainly delightful. And in the evening, in the car,
tous comme ça.
And they said, but we're not all like that. That's what they said on the journey home. We're not all like that. And of course, that made us laugh because, that's what they had to say. But it was certainly the three ladies are very serious, but the three plus myself. We certainly need some lighter moments sometimes. But they were really nice guys that I worked with anyway. I still go on well with them. So now let's talk about your film. So the title of this roundtable was How We Can Put an End to Silence and Shame. And Camille, what do you have to say faced with these frustrations? What can we do? How can we end silence and shame? So just carry on doing what we've been doing for a while by speaking out, speaking up, and reacting and reactivating this dynamic. For example, the young generation get on social media. So what their grandmother was doing in the 60s, and if there are meetings, sharing experiences, sharing lived experiences, to raise awareness of what they lived through, which was certainly very painful, but then share these stories with others. And this awareness raising, this is what we see in all feminist initiatives across all different kinds of networks and other spaces as well. So this, the first proposal to say, you can come, you can share your stories, you can often share what you've lived through. This is really important, impressions, because the lived experience is intimate and is by sharing what women live through. I think, Béatrice, what is something you see daily in these words that are shared. And this is how we move away from shame and move out of silence. We have to be heard, and also to put in place some things which allow us to raise above what we're going through, such as more concrete examples, such as shelter. And what I feel when I see this kind of common sharing of words, what can we do so that young boys and young teenagers are made aware of talking about their feelings and their emotions? This is certainly very beneficial. This is something this is really helpful for both boys and girls. I think one of the many challenges indeed that we've discussed in France, we're looking at sexual relationship education as well. And this is also feminism is also part of this, is also deconstructing the gender stereotypes of masculinity, and to allow boys to be made aware of, kind of excellence and performance. These are labels that are quite weighty. So there are some serious educational challenges as well. So Béatrice Cortellini, what would you have to say? So in our association, we have direct help, of course. We have about 1,000 people who come to the center every year who suffer from domestic violence. What I can say is that currently we have people who come and see us from the very first sign, but 20 years ago that wasn't the case. Even 10 years ago that wasn't the case. So we can see violence is picked up earlier, and this is certainly a very positive sign. About 20% of about these 1,000 people come from the very first moment, such as verbal and psychological violence, before we get to the physical violence. And that is something that we're working towards as well, to identify very quickly and very early on. And this is part of prevention. So how do we go about that? So we launched a campaign throughout the canton. So once a year to send a questionnaire, a screening to a couple just once a year. What kind of questions? So there are 8 questions in this questionnaire. This is a questionnaire that is validated scientifically in French. It was also provided in English and Spanish. And of these 8 questions, there are questions on economic violence and physical violence and sexual violence as well. And if there are less, if there are 5 points or more, so 99.8% have already suffered violence in a couple. So yes, each year we have to check in and have these types of questions. I think it's excellent that this testing is carried out. I think everybody wants to go through it. I did bring a few copies with me in my bag if anyone wants one. But if not, of course, you can have a look on our website. And once a year, we try to disseminate this questionnaire because usually around November time. So last year, for example, 46,000 people undertook this test, whether it was at their workplace or in the GP centres, or because when you're a victim of intimate partner violence, you're not often you're not always able to self-test at home. So, but there are other opportunities to do so. When you looked at this film, did the words and discussions resonate with you? Yes, of course. As I said, this is very much the tip of the iceberg. One has to be able to intervene as soon as possible before your life is in danger, because things are already very entrenched by then. So people have to come from the very outset. So we don't all have the same tools, the same methodology. It's not the same methodology, but certainly it's very interesting seeing these approaches. So what do you mean by that? What do you mean that there are different methodologies? So we work on cognitive behavioral therapy and all those kind of tools which will help the victims. Perhaps there are some kind of little tweaks and adjustments that we make. And from this, and we work alongside these victims for 1, 2, 3 years. It's a very lengthy process. To try to avoid, as we saw in the film, the lady who was kind of going backwards and forwards to the house, which is very kind of costly for her and for the children as well to move in and out of the shelter. So a woman has to leave the house 7 times before it's the final one. She goes backwards and forwards. Things are improving, and then they no longer need to come back. So when a woman tries to leave in some kind of urgent situation in the middle of the night, that's when it's most dangerous. So all of these different experiences, we try to work more in the protection area in order to, week by week, by experimenting with different things. So Bernadette, so these women who you... So there's some kind of voyeuristic element as well when you're kind of listening in, but I didn't really... I wanted to show that there was progress, that things were moving, because you could see how these ladies working. I was certainly happy to see that there was some progress. But these women were obviously suffering, but there were these other women were able to help them very efficiently and effectively. As Sandrine said at the beginning of her job, she wanted results and outcomes. Then you need to go and see a notary or a lawyer. And then things wouldn't change because women weren't able to get into that. But I do think things are improving, but the number of women who are suffering from violence hasn't decreased. But I do think things are improving. Things are gathering pace. So this lady who is 64 years old, I think it's 20 years that she's been coming and going to the center, because I thought that was extraordinary. She's rebuilt her life. Her ex-husband said, awful things to us, but then she couldn't even look in the mirror. So to what point was she under his grip? But she said, you're no longer in it. But I think it's absolutely being under the grip of someone really affects you for your whole life. I think that's really a good example, because sometimes the people around you don't really understand. A text message, for example, or fearing their partner behind the door. But it's the same level of fear, and this is post-traumatic stress disorder. When we are up against a memory or a message, but the fear is the same, it's still there. It's the fear of death. And often the people around you don't say, stop picking up your phone, don't worry, don't look at the messages, for example. The fear is the same, and it's there.
And the fact that violence is predictable as well. Well, absolutely. And power and control is not just belittling the other. It's saying things like, I can't live without you. You're the only one who gets me. They're blowing hot and cold. And well, actually, she does say that in a film. She says that for 70% of her life, she led a normal life. But how can you have a life that's 70% normal and 30% abuse? It's not that she stands on crutches. I don't know how she finds the strength, because she lives on shame. She's ashamed of those 30% because she feels that he's a great guy 70% of the time, And I'm not going to talk about what she's going through concretely, but she nearly died from his violence. And I think us women, we're very good at not looking at things. Sometimes we understand what is going on, but we refuse to see what's in front of our eyes. We'll turn to the audience very soon, so don't hesitate to think about the questions that you would like to ask. But I would like to hear what you think of this blindness to violence. Well, I would like to react to what you've all just said, because violence is also how we get out of it. But there's also this old feminist proposal, which is maybe the most efficient one, is to live without men, which has been proposed by the political lesbianism theorists in the 70s. But that leads to a very interesting idea. How can we reinvent love between men and women? How can we reinvent love and sex? Could we come up with ideas of a different kind? There's a study on the sexuality of young people from 15 to 25, and their relationships are very different from what we've known until now. They create new words, situationship, friendship, plus. So it goes to show that relationships can be rethought, and romantic love, as it has been imposed onto women for centuries, that's maybe only one option and might not be the best for everyone. And there are many books and studies on friendship. You can blossom in a friendship, and maybe in a heterosexual love might not provide that. Maybe we can be happier in a friendship than in a romantic relationship. What you're talking about here questions everything we've known growing up. And do you think it has a direct relationship to violence? Absolutely, it does, because there's the first postulate, which is we can live without men, we can maybe live without children, or we can live without sexuality, LGBTQIA. A is asexual, aromantic. And I find those questions very interesting. Doesn't have anything to do with liberation. Absolutely, because we're opening new spaces of liberty. I think the fact that friendship is something very strong and stable, and the fact that that's the first thing that men destroy when they are abusive and controlling. When a woman is completely isolated, tells you, I never go out, I don't have friends, I never go on holidays with anyone else, and my husband, I never go to the cinema. Well, they manage to cut them off. These violent men manage to cut their women off from all their relationship because they know how strong friendships are. And when we are not doing well, we tend to turn much more towards our loyal friends than towards anything else. Well, now's the time for questions from the audience. There are microphones circulating in the room. There are many questions. That's great. We have 15 minutes ahead of us, so we'll take several questions. And there are people at the back as well. We won't forget you. There's a microphone at the top of the room. Great. Good evening. Thank you for this discussion. It was very instructive, and that's actually what keeps me going. You briefly mentioned the question of education to sex life and emotional life. I'm a sex education teacher. I'm specifically focused on LGBT issues, and I was wondering, I, for myself, work with a toolbox on consent, and I try to deconstruct stereotypes. But I was wondering if you had any recommendations or maybe suggestions of tools I could include in my toolbox. Well, tools are very important, of course. There is one tool I have worked on. It's not something I particularly recommend to you, but could talk about it. I work with my husband, who is a director and who makes feminist documentaries. And his angle is what those feminists do to men, boys, couples, and love. And he made a film called Les Petits Mâles. He met with about 30 boys aged 7 to 18, and they asked them questions on feminism, feelings, violence, equality. It's a pedagogical film organized in 12 chapters, and depending on your age, you can choose to watch all of it, or not, because there are some chapters that are not appropriate for younger children. And each episode goes with a learner's kit. So as a teacher, you can work with the film, and so there's support documentation with questions, and you can organize workshops and so on. I think it's very important because we don't have enough tools for young people. So that's interesting, and watch a film, and that's always easy to show them. That's just an idea.
Il y a d'autres questions?
Any other questions?
Oui, merci beaucoup pour le film et puis pour la discussion.
Thank you for the film and for this wonderful discussion. I wanted to share with you an anecdote, and I wanted to know what you thought of it. Recently, I was at a meeting, a feminist meeting in an association. There were very few men, but there was still one, and he had to raise his hand to say, not all men. Of course he had to. And we spent 15 minutes coming up with arguments, telling him, as a woman alone at night on the streets, all men are potentially dangerous. Well, you know the drill. And one of the women said something that really stuck with me. She said, well, sexual assault on children, that's adults that commit the assault. And when we hear that, we don't need to say not all adults, because it's obvious, we know it, not all adults assault children. But when it's men, we have to reassure them, I know you're safe, I know you're fine. And I found that quite striking, because I never heard it presented that way. So I thought, if we have to reassure me, I have a lot of very nice friends, who still need to be reassured all the time. There must be something deep inside them. Maybe it's because they know deep down, they know that, yes, potentially, even them who are very kind people, under very special circumstances, well, they could become violent. Well, it's more than possible. Giulia was talking about this continuum of violence. There's a difference not in nature, but in degree. That's something that's very easy to explain to man. Each man playing sports at work almost daily can be exposed to that sexist violence. They just have to listen to what other men say. And maybe after a week, you can ask them, okay, did you listen carefully to what's being saying around you? It doesn't take much to get them to realize that it's everywhere, it's all the time, it's systemic. I think that's what's the most difficult to explain, even though I find it quite obvious. Those things work together, and they are obvious to us in our daily lives. Then maybe I think younger people are more open to it. Boomers tend to be up in arms against feminism. Twice I had the opportunity, I'm not sure if it was an opportunity, but I got to talk to Alain Finkielkraut about it. And the first time I was very stressed. I expected him to be very aggressive, and I had prepared the discussion, I had notes and all on in front of me, because he'd invited someone else. He always does that. He'd invited a friend, their boys' club. So I was prepared, and they came totally unprepared. They had the worst arguments. And they were telling me things like, well, sometimes when we were going out when we were young, girls didn't want us. And I was like, what, is that all you have to say? And it felt a bit strange because I was very prepared, and in front of me I had people who we were not talking about the same things, and so I spent an hour giving them a lecture about feminism. And we absolutely have to listen to you on France Culture, right? Well, there's a theatre troupe that's turned out into a play. They've noticed how comical the whole situation was. During the talk show, I felt like it must have been so boring. Everybody must have turned off their radio, but it was still interesting. And there's a part of some men who are completely lost. It's fine, you know, they won't be among us for very long anymore. We need to focus on the others, you know, those who are around 50 years old now, you know. We have to watch them carefully. When we did that film called Les Mâles du Siècle, we interviewed men from 18 to 90 years old. I was involved in preparing the film, and I was convinced that the 30-year-old today were maybe the first generation of feminists in the history of humanity. And how can I put it? Well, not so much. As one said, well, we're trying, you know, but it's hard. And I'm sorry for you if you're in your 30s. Yes, it's hard, but you're not making much effort, are you? You've understood that something was wrong, but you don't have the tools to change things. If you're in your 20s, there were 3-4 of them between 18 and 2022. We could feel that things were changing. And toxic masculinity is rampant as well. I was going to say that's something else. No, it's the same thing, but beyond these masculinists, the young masculinists, what we've managed to do as feminists is to shake the foundations of patriarchy. Patriarchy, which wants to reduce women to their bodily functions, and this hetero-patriarchal family and society. Now, there are cracks in the wall, like, for example, same-sex marriage, IVF for all women. And when the conservative demonstrations started again against gay marriage, well, I felt like, you know, those are the remnants of a world that is gone. And this issue of melanism amongst young men is something related to fear. And I see it with my students. There are young men who come to me and tell me, you know, we agree with you, we are in favor of equality, but we always get the feeling that we're being singled out, you're pointing the finger at us, everything we do is wrong, whatever we do will always be wrong. So it's not just about reassuring them, it's about finding the right tools to help them understand better what we're talking about, and help them understand when we say all men, we're talking about the system and about the collective responsibility of men, because historically this system has been created by men and perpetuated by men. So if they are part of the problem, maybe they could find an interest in being part of the solution as well. We just have to find ways to talk about it to them.
I think there's a question at the back there. Thank you very much. I just wanted to talk about fear, so I'm glad we've addressed this. We often talk about shame. We say the shame needs to change, but I think also fear has to change. I think men have to be scared of raping. Men need to have more fear of raping than being treated as a rapist, because we need. You said we need to reassure them as if. I understood really what you were saying, but today I ask myself, we have to say, do not be a rapist. Do not rape. It's something that happens every day. It begins with not being sexist. That is what you have to be scared of.
Du shitstorm, tu dois pas avoir peur de...
You don't have to be scared of reputation, but you have to be scared of being a rapist. But what do we have to do is to make men scared of being that? So there's some very important feminist work on that here in Switzerland as well. Anything to add? What you're raising is what Giulia was spoken about. 0.6% of rapists who are known to the justice system in France. Men aren't scared, but while the justice system is not more efficient, then so in France, feminists are seen as hysterical. So we have to. Until the justice system is more effective, when women aren't scared about filing a complaint, then things won't work. So as a woman who was sexually assaulted. So each time this happened, women said, I'm not going to file a complaint. Because during the process and trial, even when they, for example, when they have to discuss things with their parents, but they don't want their parents to be made aware of what happened. So that's why young women aren't filing any complaints. But there's a whole system that has to change. So in the collective in Liège, they were able to, if there is an open case of a woman, if she phones the police, these women don't have to convince the police. There's an immediate reaction. They can't ask them, say, they've already left before. What happens if they call and say, I'm in danger? Then they're there within 5 minutes. There is an obligation. This is an agreement through the town of Liège. And I think that's a really good point, because the women are aware of that. If not, then they go to the first, second, third, fourth police officer and then repeat the same thing. But they say, you've been here a number of times before, but they can't say this anymore. The police must come straight away and take the person out of the house. Because it's often why should the woman have to leave the house? But it's still the same question. Why is it the woman has to leave the home, who then has to rebuild her life elsewhere? But she's not the one causing problems. But now, more often, the police remove the violent men from the house and then put, I don't know if that's the same in Switzerland and France, but in Belgium this is the case. But then there is a restraining order against these men. So in terms of safety, this allows these women, because they don't have to go back, to another police officer and repeat the same thing again. It's very tiring. So repeat the same thing 10 times or more. But I think these small things are changing. There has to be a strong political will, of course. So since the Mazan trial, for example, we've been against a brick wall, because so much energy has been lost that not everyone's in agreement on aspects, but time is lost. So we have to train the magistrates, the lawyers, and the police force as well to, for example, in Spain, there are special courts on sexual and domestic violence, for example. Also, the political will is key. Who holds the reins of power? Unfortunately, that rests with men. We are supposed to have ended but now, but I think there's another question there at the back. Thank you very much. I'll just ask very quickly. So I'd like to thank you for this super interesting discussion. And I'd like to thank the Film Festival, and I'd like to encourage them to continue to address these types of issues. We've spoken quite a lot on how we can influence men. We spoke about the role of feminists. I admit that the question of education is key, but what can be done? What exists indeed? In education, in school, mothers who bring up young boys who will then turn into men. I think in our countries, what we've spoken about today, you're not supposed to hit people. Education on consent and rape, etc. But how can we equip mothers and teachers with the tools to explain the patriarchy, to explain, because it's very rare that a mother would say to their child, you mustn't rape or you mustn't hit anyone. But we do have to use you must never use your power to isolate a woman. This is a whole patriarchal system behind me. Is there any research behind this and how we can educate young boys and young girls, of course, on their rights? You mustn't hit, you mustn't rape, but also the issues of control. What can we do? Thank you. Béatrice. Yes, as you rightly point out, in Switzerland, for example, it differs from one canton to the next, but in the Jura canton, which is introduced awareness raising about respecting one another amongst all young people in secondary school. So this is now obligatory. You can't get to the age of 15 years old and not having participated in some of these workshops. So this is a canton which has implemented this system, but also different cantons throughout Switzerland which also looked at different awareness-raising campaigns. But this really lies under the will of certain establishments. This isn't something that's automatic. For example, in Geneva, there are workshops and awareness raising which have been set up, intimate partner violence, which is addressed in secondary school level, but really falls to the goodwill of establishments. But there are more establishments which are interested. There were around 4,000 people last year who were able to participate in these workshops. So you can't get to the end of secondary school without having been made aware of these issues. And in terms of teaching and learning, is that young people of the same age who have published these leaflets, who have set up these slogans, these 15 or 16-year-olds, or these videographers or illustrators, these are the ones who are raising awareness through their work. And they're certainly all very aware of this, but certainly there is criticism. More can be done, but each workshop, each young person draws up their own slogan. We had about 8,000 or so at the moment. Thank you very much. That's the end of the discussion this evening. I'd like to thank all the guests. And thank you to the FIFDH. So Giulia is already on the train. Thank you very much, Camille Froidevaux-Metterie. Thank you very much, Béatrice. Cortellini, and thank you very much, Benedetta Remy, and I hope you all enjoy the festival. Thank you.